The marble floors of the Grandeur Hotel reflected Daniel Hawthorne's polished Italian shoes as he strode through the lobby, barking orders into his phone. $300 million in quarterly profits, and still his board questioned his expansion into European markets. Idiots, all of them. He ended the call with more force than necessary and glanced at his Patek Philippe. 7:42. His breakfast meeting started in 18 minutes, and room service had delivered lukewarm coffee. Again. This hotel, despite its 5-star rating and astronomical nightly rates, couldn't manage the simplest tasks. A young woman in a standard-issue gray uniform pushed a housekeeping cart near the elevator bank. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she moved with the efficient invisibility that came from years of being overlooked. Daniel barely registered her presence as he approached the concierge desk, already formulating his complaint. "Before you keep reading, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever misjudged someone so completely that discovering the truth changed everything you thought you knew? Stay with me, because what happens next will challenge everything you think about power, identity, and the mask we all wear." The concierge, a middle-aged man named Robert, smiled with practiced politeness. Daniel didn't return it. "The coffee in my suite was barely warm this morning. This is the 3rd time this week. I'm paying $7,000 a night, and I can't get a decent cup of coffee delivered at the correct temperature. What kind of establishment are you running here?" Robert's smile never wavered, though something flickered in his eyes. "I sincerely apologize, Mr. Hawthorne. I'll speak with kitchen staff immediately and ensure fresh coffee is sent to your suite within 10 minutes. "I don't have 10 minutes. I have a breakfast meeting in the terrace room in 15 minutes. Your incompetence is wasting my time, which costs considerably more than your annual salary." The words came out sharper than Daniel intended, but he didn't soften them. He'd built a tech empire from nothing, fought his way up from a middle-class background in Ohio to become one of the youngest billionaires in Silicon Valley. Nobody handed him anything. He demanded excellence because he'd earned the right to expect it. Robert's professional mask slipped for just a second. "Of course, sir. Again, my apologies." Daniel turned away, dismissing the conversation, and nearly collided with the housekeeping cart. The young woman steadied it quickly, stepping aside with a murmured apology. Her eyes stayed down, focused on the cart's contents, arranging towels that didn't need arranging. "Watch where you're going," Daniel snapped, irritation bleeding into his voice. "Is everyone here incompetent? Do you understand English?" She glanced up briefly. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and for a fraction of a second, something passed through them that Daniel couldn't quite identify. Then she lowered her gaze again and nodded. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." The accent was faint but present, a soft lilt that suggested Spanish or perhaps Portuguese as a first language. Daniel had heard that accent 1,000 times in California, usually from people cleaning his offices or tending his landscaping. Hard-working people, certainly, but not people he needed to engage with beyond basic instructions. He moved past her without another word, his mind already shifting to the meeting ahead. The hotel's failures would be addressed later, probably in a scathing email to management. For now, he had bigger concerns. The terrace room lived up to its name, offering floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. Morning light poured in, turning everything golden. His breakfast companion, Senator Patricia Morrison, was already seated at their usual corner table. She stood as he approached, extending a manicured hand. "Daniel," punctual as always. Patricia, looking well. They settled into the familiar dance of powerful people, discussing market trends and political maneuvering over eggs, Benedict, and fresh squeezed orange juice. The senator wanted his support for her upcoming campaign. Daniel wanted favorable legislation for his company's upcoming merger. Neither said these things directly. That wasn't how their world worked. 20 minutes into the conversation, Patricia paused mid-sentence, her attention caught by something over Daniel's shoulder. Her expression shifted, professional mask momentarily forgotten, replaced by genuine surprise. "Well, I'll be damned." Daniel turned. The young woman from the hallway had entered the terrace room, but she no longer wore the gray housekeeping uniform. Instead, she was dressed in an elegant navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair, freed from its practical bun, fell in glossy waves past her shoulders. She moved across the room with quiet confidence, pausing to shake hands with the hotel's general manager. "Who is that?" Daniel asked, unable to keep the confusion from his voice. Patricia's smile held genuine amusement. "You don't recognize Dr. Elena Vasquez? She's only been on the cover of Forbes, Time, and The Economist in the past 6 months. Though I suppose you've been busy with your European expansion." The name triggered recognition, fragments of articles Daniel had skimmed but never read fully. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the economist who'd revolutionized microfinance in developing nations. The woman who'd turned a small nonprofit into a global movement, lifting millions out of poverty through innovative lending structures and community-based economic development. She'd been a keynote speaker at Davos last year. The World Bank had offered her a director position, which she'd famously declined, and he'd just told her to watch where she was going. Had asked if she understood English. Patricia watched his face, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "She's here for the Economic Forum panel tomorrow. I'm moderating. She's speaking on the intersection of technology and economic development in underserved communities. Brilliant woman, speaks 7 languages fluently, PhD from Oxford, second doctorate from MIT. Started from nothing too. Came to the US when she was 16 with barely enough English to order food." Daniel's stomach tightened. The casual cruelty of his words replayed in his mind, each syllable sharper than before. "Why was she dressed as housekeeping staff?" Patricia shrugged. "Elena has some unusual habits. I've heard she does this periodically. Works regular jobs for a day or a week to stay connected to the people her work serves. She says it keeps her honest, reminds her why the work matters. Apparently she was here cleaning rooms for the past 3 days. Nobody recognized her." Nobody except the staff, Daniel thought, remembering the look on the concierge's face. Robert had probably known the entire time Daniel was complaining about lukewarm coffee to a woman who'd done more genuine good in the world than he'd ever considered attempting. Elena finished her conversation with the general manager and turned, scanning the room. Her gaze found Daniel's table, and for a long moment their eyes met. No anger showed in her expression, no judgment, just a calm, assessing look that somehow felt worse than outright condemnation. Then she smiled slightly, nodded once, and turned away to join a group of people near the windows. Daniel barely tasted the rest of his breakfast. Patricia, sensing his distraction, wrapped up their discussion with practiced efficiency. They agreed to speak again next week, after she'd reviewed his proposal. She left with a knowing smile that suggested she understood exactly why his attention had fractured. He should leave. His schedule was packed, meetings stacked back to back until evening. But Daniel found himself remaining in his seat, coffee growing cold, watching Elena Vasquez hold court by the windows. She spoke animatedly with her companions, her hands moving to emphasize points, occasionally laughing at something someone said. The warmth in her interaction stood in sharp contrast to the cool efficiency that dominated his own professional relationships. When she finally excused herself from the group, Daniel stood before he'd fully thought through what he was doing. He crossed the room in long strides, intercepting her near the doorway. "Dr. Vasquez, I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." She turned, one eyebrow lifting slightly. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the quiet confidence that came not from wealth or power, but from something deeper and more substantial. "Mr. Hawthorne, of course. Though I should mention, I do understand English. Quite fluently, actually." The words were delivered without malice, almost conversationally, but they landed like a punch. Daniel felt heat rise in his face, an unfamiliar sensation. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuine embarrassment. "About that, I owe you an apology. I was rude and dismissive, and I made assumptions based on—" He hesitated, searching for words that didn't make it worse. "Based on a uniform and an accent?" Elena finished for him, her tone still pleasant, but with steel underneath. "It's quite all right, Mr. Hawthorne. It happens more often than you'd think. People see what they expect to see. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But at least you've recognized the problem. That's farther than most get." She moved a step past him, and Daniel felt an unexpected urgency to keep the conversation going. "Your work with microfinance in Latin America, it's remarkable. I read the Harvard Business Review piece on your lending models last month. This was a lie. He hadn't read it, but he'd skim it tonight, would read everything he could find about her work. Elena's expression suggested she knew he was lying, but she was too polite to call him on it directly. Thank you. Though if you'd actually read the piece, you'd know that calling it my work misses the point entirely. The communities do the work. I just helped create structures that stopped exploiting them. Right, of course. Daniel felt like he was drowning, each attempt to recover only pulling him deeper. Are you speaking at the Economic Forum tomorrow? I am. Panel discussion on sustainable development in the digital age. Senator Morrison is moderating. Should be interesting, provided we can move past the usual platitudes about technology saving the world. There was a challenge in those words, a subtle dig at the tech industry's tendency toward messianic self-importance. Daniel had given versions of the technology will save a speech dozens of times. Now, facing this woman who'd actually changed lives without the benefit of venture capital or stock options, his usual talking points felt hollow. Would you be interested in having dinner tonight? The words came out before he'd fully formed the thought. I'd like to hear more about your work, and perhaps discuss some areas where our approaches might intersect. Elena studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. That's very generous, Mr. Hawthorne, but my schedule is quite full. Perhaps another time. The dismissal was polite but firm. Daniel found himself on the receiving end of the same courtesy he'd shown countless people whose time he didn't value. The reversal stung more than he'd expected. Of course, I understand. Perhaps I could at least buy you a coffee? To make up for the lukewarm one you probably had to deliver to my suite this morning. A smile flickered across Elena's face, genuine amusement breaking through her professional reserve. You know what? Sure. I have 20 minutes before my next meeting. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here that makes excellent espresso and doesn't charge $15 for it. She led him out of the hotel, past the doorman who nodded respectfully, clearly recognizing her despite the uniform she'd worn hours before. The November air had a bite to it, and Elena pulled a coat from her bag as they walked. Daniel's driver followed at a discreet distance, the black Mercedes moving slowly through traffic. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place Daniel never entered. Small, crowded, filled with students on laptops and mothers with strollers. The menu was written on a chalkboard, prices reasonable enough that his usual coffee budget could probably fund a week's worth of drinks here. Elena ordered in rapid Spanish with the barista, who lit up at hearing his native language. Daniel ordered a black coffee, suddenly self-conscious about his usual elaborate drink order. They found a corner table, barely large enough for 2 cups. Daniel folded his tall frame into the small chair, feeling absurdly out of place in his $10,000 suit. So, Elena said, wrapping her hands around her cup, what do you actually want to know? And please, let's skip past the part where you pretend to be interested in microfinance when what you really want is to figure out why you feel bad about this morning. The directness caught him off guard. In his world, where people danced around uncomfortable topics, hid agendas behind corporate speak and political maneuvering. Elena Vasquez apparently didn't have patience for that game. Fair enough. Why do you do it? The undercover work in hotels? Because power blinds people, wealth especially. You can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you're not regularly reminded what life looks like for people who aren't powerful or wealthy, you start making decisions based on theoretical understanding rather than lived experience. Those decisions usually hurt the people you're trying to help. And working as a housekeeper for 3 days prevents that? It's part of it. I also volunteer at food banks, spend time in the communities where our programs operate, actually listen to people when they tell me what they need instead of assuming I know better. Revolutionary concepts, I realize. The sarcasm was gentle but present. Daniel sipped his coffee, which was actually excellent, and considered her words. When was the last time he'd listened to anyone who wasn't already successful? His entire network consisted of people who'd already won, who'd already climbed to the top of various hierarchies. He'd stopped hearing from people still struggling to climb years ago. You think I'm blind? I think you're human. We all have blind spots. But yes, Mr. Hawthorne, I think you're particularly blind. You've built an extraordinary company, created thousands of jobs, generated enormous wealth, but I suspect you measure success primarily in stock prices and market share, rather than human impact. And I know you treat service workers as if they're invisible or incompetent, which suggests you've forgotten what it's like to not have power. The words should have made him angry. Instead, Daniel felt something closer to relief. Patricia had been right. This woman was brilliant. But more than that, she was honest in a way he'd almost forgotten existed. I grew up middle class in Ohio. My dad was an accountant. My mom taught elementary school. I worked my way through Stanford, started my company in a garage. I remember what it was like. Elena's expression softened slightly. Do you? When's the last time you worried about making rent? Worried about losing health insurance if you lost your job? Had to choose between fixing your car and buying groceries? Memories fade, Mr. Hawthorne, especially when you're surrounded by luxury every day. Daniel thought about his penthouse apartment, his collection of vintage cars, the private jet that made transcontinental meetings effortless. He traveled more in a month than his parents had in their entire lives. He'd been to 40 countries. He owned homes in 5. So what do you suggest? Should I give away everything I've earned? I'm not suggesting anything. You asked why I do what I do. I'm explaining. What you do with that information is your business. She checked her phone, a simple model without the ostentatious gold plating that marked his own. I need to go. Meeting with the Economic Forum organizers in 10 minutes. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Hawthorne. It was unexpectedly pleasant. Daniel, please. Elena, though you already knew that. She stood, gathering her coat. For what it's worth, the apology this morning meant something. Most people in your position would have simply ignored the whole thing. Maybe complained to management about staff impersonating housekeeping. You sought me out instead. That suggests some capacity for growth. High praise. It really is. You'd be surprised how rare that capacity becomes once people reach a certain level of success. They stop learning, stop changing. They convince themselves they figured everything out. Daniel stood as well. Will you be at the reception tonight? Before the forum? Briefly. But Daniel, let me be clear. I'm not interested in becoming another connection in your network or a diversity win for your company's board. If you want to have a real conversation about how technology can actually serve people who need it most, I'm willing. But if you're looking for absolution or a feel-good partnership that's really just PR, I'd rather we both save our time. She left before he could respond, weaving through the crowded coffee shop and disappearing onto the street. Through the window, Daniel watched her flag down a taxi, her dark hair catching the light as she ducked inside. He sat back down slowly, his coffee cooling, and pulled out his phone. The Harvard Business Review article on Elena's work was easy to find. He began reading, really reading this time, and didn't stop until his assistant called to ask where he was. He'd missed 2 meetings. The reception that evening was held in the hotel's ballroom, crystal chandeliers casting soft light over 500 of the most influential people in finance, technology, and government. Daniel arrived fashionably late, scanning the crowd until he found Elena standing near the bar, engaged in animated conversation with 2 men he recognized as hedge fund managers. He approached slowly, catching the tail end of their discussion. The problem with your model, one of the men was saying, is that it doesn't scale. You're helping thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, but there are billions in poverty. Without traditional capital structures, you'll never reach them all. Elena's smile was patient but firm. Jonathan, I've been hearing that argument for 10 years, but traditional capital structures are precisely what keep those billions in poverty. Your investment funds demand returns that require exploitation. My model accepts lower financial returns in exchange for higher human returns. It absolutely scales, just not in ways that make you personally wealthy. But surely what? Surely there's a way to help the poor that also enriches the already rich? Why is that the goal? Why is profit maximization the only measure of success? Jonathan opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, looking frustrated. His companion jumped in. Dr. Vasquez, you're being deliberately obtuse. Nobody's saying profit is the only measure. But without profit, there's no sustainability. Your projects rely heavily on grants and donations. That's not a stable foundation. Except my projects have been running for 12 years with a 94% loan repayment rate and have created over 30,000 businesses in 7 countries. Your fund lost 40% of its value in the last market correction and laid off 200 employees. Please, lecture me more about sustainability. The two men exchanged glances, clearly deciding a tactical retreat was their best option. They excused themselves with forced politeness, leaving Elena alone at the bar. She caught Daniel's eye and raised her glass slightly. Enjoying the show? Immensely. Do you always eviscerate people at cocktail parties? Only when they insist on explaining my field to me, despite having never actually worked with poor communities. Jonathan's firm manages $17 billion, and he genuinely believes poverty exists because poor people don't understand compound interest. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Daniel ordered a whiskey and leaned against the bar. For the record, I agree with you. Most venture capital approaches to poverty are fundamentally exploitative. They're designed to extract value, not create it. Elena looked at him with surprise. That's a surprisingly honest admission from someone who made his fortune on venture capital. I made my fortune on technology. The venture capital came later, and I'm not particularly proud of all my investments. Some of them prioritize returns over impact in ways that make me uncomfortable. But changing course when you're moving fast is complicated. It's only complicated if you prioritize your own comfort over other people's welfare. The words stung, but Daniel didn't look away. You're right, and I don't have a good defense for that beyond admitting I've been selfish and short-sighted. Elena studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. You know what's frustrating? I believe you actually mean that, which makes this conversation harder. Because I want to stay angry at you for this morning, but you're making it difficult. I could be more of an asshole if it helps. A genuine laugh escaped her. Please don't. There are plenty of those here already. They talked for the next hour, the conversation ranging from microfinance structures to machine learning applications in agricultural development. Elena spoke passionately about a project in Guatemala where farmers were using smartphone apps to track crop yields and predict market prices. Daniel described a platform his company had developed for remote education, but admitted they'd struggled to make it work in communities without reliable internet. Because you designed it for the infrastructure you have, not the infrastructure they have, Elena said. Classic mistake. You can't just take first world solutions and drop them into third world contexts. It doesn't work. So what's the solution? Start from their reality, not yours. Go to these communities. Spend time there. Understand the actual constraints they face. Then design from the ground up, not the top down. The reception began winding down around 10. People drifted away in clusters, heading to late dinners or hotel bars for more private conversations. Elena checked her phone and sighed. I should go. Early panel tomorrow, and I need to review my notes. Daniel nodded, disappointed but not surprised. Elena, I want to do better, not just with how I treat people, but with how my company operates. Would you be willing to consult with us? Help us redesign some of our approaches to actually serve communities that need it? She looked at him skeptically. Do you understand what you're asking? Real consultation means I tell you hard truths about your business model. It means you change practices that are profitable but harmful. It means accepting lower returns in exchange for higher impact. Most CEOs say they want that, but when it comes down to choosing between their bottom line and real change, the bottom line wins. I understand. Do you? Daniel, you spent this morning complaining about lukewarm coffee in a $7,000 hotel suite. You snapped at a woman you thought was a housekeeper because she momentarily blocked your path. Those aren't small things. They're indicators of how you see the world, of who matters to you and who doesn't. Changing your company requires changing yourself first. The words landed hard, exposing something Daniel had been avoiding all day. She was right. The problem wasn't just his business practices or his investment choices. The problem was him, the person he'd become in his climb to success, the casual cruelty that had become second nature. Then help me change. Elena's expression softened. Why? Why does this matter to you? Is it guilt over this morning? Because guilt is a terrible motivator. It fades. Daniel considered the question seriously, pushing past the easy answers. Because I'm 43 years old and I've spent the last 20 years building an empire that I'm increasingly unsure actually matters. I have more money than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. I have power and influence and success by every conventional measure. And I'm lonely and empty. And when I look at what you've built, what you've actually done for real people, my accomplishments feel hollow. The honesty surprised even him. He hadn't admitted those feelings to anyone, hadn't fully admitted them to himself until this moment. Elena's face showed real sympathy now. That's the best answer you could have given. Okay, I'll consult with your company, but I have conditions. Name them. First, you personally commit to spending 1 week in the field with one of my projects. Not a photo op. Real work, really listening to people. Second, any recommendations I make get seriously considered, not filed away. Third, if I determine your company is causing more harm than good in certain areas, you commit to shutting those operations down regardless of profitability. Done. Just like that? You're not even going to think about it. Daniel smiled. Elena, 3 hours ago you called me blind. You're offering me a chance to see. Why would I hesitate? She extended her hand. All right then. Partners. God help us both. Her handshake was firm, businesslike, and when she walked away this time, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. He slept poorly that night, his mind churning through the day's events. Around 3 in the morning, he got up and went to his laptop, pulling up employee records for the hotel. He found Robert, the concierge, and made a note to have a generous bonus sent with an apology. Then he found the housekeeping schedule, trying to identify the other staff members who'd worked Elena's shift. They'd known who she was, had probably heard every word he'd said. The thought made him cringe. The next morning, Daniel attended Elena's panel discussion. She was brilliant, as expected, dismantling facile arguments about technology and development with precision and warmth. She made complex economic theory accessible, told stories about real people in real communities, forced the audience to confront uncomfortable truths about global inequality and their own complicity in maintaining it. Afterward, mobbed by people wanting to continue the conversation, she caught his eye across the room and mouthed "coffee shop" before being pulled into another discussion. He arrived at the small coffee shop before her, ordering 2 espressos and claiming the same corner table. She showed up 10 minutes later, looking tired but energized. That was exhausting. You were magnificent. I was correct. There's a difference. She sipped her espresso, closing her eyes briefly. God, this is good. Hotel coffee is terrible, even when it's hot. Even when you're delivering it. Especially then. You have no idea how tempting it was to spit in yours this morning. Daniel laughed, surprised by her bluntness. I would have deserved it. You would have. But it turns out I'm too professional for petty revenge. Who knew? They talked logistics. Elena wanted him in Guatemala in 2 weeks for his field experience. She'd arrange everything, but he needed to come alone, no assistance or security detail. Just Daniel staying in a local home, working alongside farmers and small business owners, seeing how her programs actually functioned at ground level. What about language? My Spanish is terrible. Then you'll struggle to communicate, which is probably good for you. Most of the people we serve struggle to communicate in systems designed for English speakers. You'll get a tiny taste of what that's like. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel threw himself into preparation. He hired Elena's organization as consultants, bringing her team in to audit his company's practices. The initial findings were brutal. His company's push into developing markets had prioritized profit extraction over local benefit. Their education platforms required infrastructure most target communities didn't have. Their employment practices in manufacturing outsourcing paid poverty wages while executives made millions. His board was horrified when he proposed changes. Market analysts predicted stock price drops. His CFO resigned, calling him naive. But Daniel held firm, using his majority voting shares to push through reforms over objections. Elena watched from the sidelines, offering guidance but letting him fight his own battles. You need to own these decisions, she told him during one particularly frustrating strategy session. If I make them for you, you'll resent me when they get hard. This has to be your choice. Guatemala was transformative. Daniel stayed with a family in a small farming community, sleeping on a thin mattress in a room he shared with their 2 teenage sons. He worked in fields, helped with harvest, attended community lending meetings where Elena's microfinance program was discussed in rapid Spanish he could barely follow. Maria, the mother of the family hosting him, spoke no English, but through gesture, patience, and eventually Elena translating, she explained how the small loans she'd received had allowed her to buy better seeds, how the improved yield had paid for her daughter's school fees, how that daughter was now studying to be a nurse. "You understand," Maria said through Elena, "that money isn't the only thing we needed. We needed someone to believe we were capable, to trust us to make good decisions. Your banks, they wanted collateral we didn't have, interest rates we couldn't afford. They assumed we would fail because we are poor. Elena's program assumed we would succeed if given a real chance. That belief changed everything." Daniel spent his evenings sitting with the family, sharing simple meals and attempting conversation in broken Spanish, while they laughed kindly at his mistakes. He learned the names of their children, their dreams for the future. He saw the crushing weight of poverty, but also the resilience, the ingenuity, the fierce love that persisted despite systemic failures designed to keep them struggling. On his last night, Maria presented him with a woven bracelet, the bright colors representing, Elena translated, strength and friendship. Daniel wore it on the flight home, this simple thread worth more than any luxury watch. Back in New York, everything looked different. His penthouse felt obscenely large. His car collection seemed absurd. The casual waste in his daily life, the money spent without thought, became impossible to ignore. He called an emergency board meeting. "I'm restructuring the company. We're redirecting 30% of profits into a new foundation focused on sustainable economic development. I'm cutting executive compensation, including my own, by half. The savings go to raising wages for our lowest paid workers globally. I'm killing 3 product lines that can't be adapted to serve communities without reliable infrastructure. And I'm committing us to becoming a B corporation within 18 months, legally requiring us to consider social impact alongside profit." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted, voices overlapping in protest and disbelief. Daniel waited them out, his hand unconsciously touching the bracelet on his wrist. When they quieted, he continued, "I know this is radical. I know some of you will fight me. Some of you will quit. The stock will probably drop in the short term. Analysts will call me naive or idealistic or worse. I don't care. I've spent 20 years building a company that makes me wealthy while contributing to a system that keeps billions in poverty. That ends now. If you can't support this direction, I'll buy you out at fair market value. But this is happening." 3 board members resigned within a week. The stock dropped 12%. Forbes ran a cover story titled, "Tech Billionaire's Midlife Crisis or Genuine Change." Elena called him the day it published. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, better than I've felt in years. I'm terrified, but it's the good kind of terror, the kind that means you're doing something that actually matters." "Good, because I have another challenge for you." "Of course you do. There's a conference next month in Nairobi on technology and development. I want you to speak, not about your company's products, about your journey from being a blind billionaire to whatever you're becoming now. Be honest about your failures. Talk about what you learned." "Elena, I'm not qualified to speak at that conference." "You're more qualified than you think. Those attendees need to hear from someone like you, someone who benefited from exploitative systems and chose to change. It's easy to dismiss activists and nonprofit leaders as idealistic outsiders. Harder to dismiss one of your own." The speech was the hardest thing Daniel had ever written. He drafted it a dozen times. Each version Elena reviewed with brutal honesty. "Too defensive here. Too self-congratulatory there. You're still making excuses. Take responsibility. Show real vulnerability." Standing on stage in Nairobi, looking out at hundreds of faces, Daniel felt exposed in ways money and power had protected him from for decades. But he told the truth. About his blind spots, his casual cruelty, the moment in a hotel hallway when a woman he'd dismissed as invisible turned out to be extraordinary. He talked about Guatemala, about Maria and her family, about learning that poverty wasn't a failure of the poor, but a failure of systems designed to keep them powerless. "I don't have answers yet," he concluded. "I'm still learning, still making mistakes. But I'm finally asking the right questions, finally seeing people I'd trained myself not to see. If there are others like me in this room, other people who've succeeded in systems that require someone else's exploitation, I'm asking you to look. Really look. It's uncomfortable and humbling, and it will cost you. But what we're currently doing costs other people everything. The applause was long and genuine. Afterward, dozens of people approached him, some to share their own stories of transformation, others to challenge him on specific points. Elena watched from the side of the room, a small smile on her face. That night, over dinner at a restaurant Elena chose, they finally acknowledged what had been building between them for months. The attraction had been there from the beginning, but buried under professional boundaries and legitimate concerns about power dynamics. I'm afraid, Elena admitted, afraid that this ends like so many stories of wealthy men being transformed by women's work, where I become the moral center that allows you to feel good about yourself without actually having to change. I'm afraid of that too, Daniel said. Afraid I'll disappoint you. Afraid I'll backslide when things get hard. Afraid that I'm still too broken by years of prioritizing profit over people to be the person you deserve. Those are good fears, the kind of fears that mean you're taking this seriously. So where does that leave us? Elena reached across the table, taking his hand, figuring it out together, but slowly, with clear boundaries, and with the understanding that if you revert to being the asshole from the hotel hallway, I'm gone. No second chances. Fair enough. Their relationship developed over the next year in parallel with Daniel's company transformation. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, moments when Elena called him on, backsliding into old patterns, times when Daniel felt overwhelmed by the complexity of changing entrenched systems. But there were also moments of profound joy. Returning to Maria's community in Guatemala and seeing the school her daughter's nursing income had helped fund. Watching his company's new education platform, redesigned from the ground up with local input, reach children in communities his old model had never served. Standing with Elena as she received recognition for her work from institutions that had once dismissed her ideas as unrealistic. On their first anniversary of knowing each other, Daniel arranged a surprise. He'd bought the hotel, the Grandeur, where they'd first met, not to shut it down or fire people, but to transform it into a training center for hospitality workers, providing free education and placement services. The penthouse suite where he'd complained about lukewarm coffee now housed classrooms. The expensive restaurants became cafeterias serving students. Elena cried when he told her, "You're an idiot for spending this much money on something symbolic." "Maybe, but it's the right kind of idiocy." "Yeah," she agreed, kissing him. "It really is." They stood together in what had been the lobby, watching students from 12 countries practice their English and service skills. Robert, the concierge who'd witnessed Daniel at his worst, now ran the program. He approached them with genuine warmth. "Dr. Vasquez, Mr. Hawthorne, we're hosting a graduation ceremony next week for our first class. 23 students, all placed in living wage positions. We'd be honored if you'd both speak." "We'd love to," Elena said. After Robert walked away, Daniel turned to Elena. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without making a joke or deflecting." "Okay. That morning in the hotel when I was cruel and dismissive, when I couldn't even see you as human enough to deserve basic respect, that was the worst and best moment of my life. Worst because it forced me to confront who I'd become. Best because it led me to you, to this work, to becoming someone I can actually respect when I look in the mirror." Elena's eyes were bright with tears. "Daniel Hawthorne, did you just tell me that being an asshole was the best thing that ever happened to you? I'm saying that sometimes we need our worst moments exposed before we can change. I'm saying you forced me to see, and I'm saying I love you, and I'm grateful every day that you gave me a chance to be better." "Well," Elena said, smiling through tears, "I love you too. Even though you're still sometimes an idiot about privilege and power. Always, I promise to be your idiot. That's not even romantic. It's honest." They laughed together in the transformed lobby, surrounded by students studying to build better lives in a building that represented both the worst and best of who Daniel had been and who he was becoming. 2 years after their first meeting, Daniel proposed at the small coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation. No expensive restaurant, No orchestra, no helicopter. Just the two of them, cheap espresso, and a simple question. Elena said yes. Their wedding was small, held in Maria's community in Guatemala, surrounded by people whose lives had been genuinely changed by their work. The ceremony was conducted in Spanish and English, with frequent laughter when Daniel's pronunciation failed spectacularly. Maria's daughter, now a working nurse, was maid of honor. In his vows, Daniel promised to keep looking, to never stop seeing people others dismissed as invisible. Elena promised to keep challenging him, to never let comfort become more important than justice. They danced under stars, ate simple food, and celebrated surrounded by real community rather than powerful connections. It was perfect. The company continued evolving. Some quarters showed losses, some investors fled, but slowly, persistently, a new model emerged. One that measured success in lives improved rather than just profits maximized. One that proved you could do good and do well without exploitation. Daniel's wealth decreased by 40% over 5 years. He'd never been happier. Elena's work expanded globally, supported now by substantial funding from Daniel's foundation and growing networks of businesses committed to actual rather than performative change. Her next book became required reading in economics courses worldwide. They bought a small house in Guatemala, spending 3 months a year living there, working directly with communities, staying connected to the reality that money and power made too easy to ignore. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, they returned to the Grandeur Training Center for a celebration. 500 students had graduated. 92% were employed in living wage positions. 17 had started their own businesses. 3 were pursuing college degrees. Standing in front of the crowd, Daniel told the story of how they'd met, the cruel words he'd spoken, the assumptions he'd made, the moment Elena had spoken and shattered his worldview. I was blind, he concluded, blind to my own privilege, blind to the humanity of people I decided weren't worth seeing. Elena didn't just open my eyes. She taught me that seeing isn't passive. It's a choice you make every day. A choice to look at people others ignore, to listen to voices others dismiss, to value lives that systems are designed to exploit. He looked at Elena, standing beside him. I'm still learning, still making mistakes, but I'm not blind anymore. And for that, I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. Elena took the microphone. Daniel's being characteristically self-flagellating. Yes, he was awful that morning, but you know what most people don't do? They don't apologize. They don't seek out the person they've wronged. They don't spend years genuinely trying to change. The reason I love this difficult, sometimes infuriating man is because when confronted with his failings, he chose growth over comfort. That's rare, that's valuable, and that's what I hope all of you carry forward. Be willing to be wrong. Be willing to change. Be willing to see. The applause was thunderous. Later that night, sitting together in their hotel room, Elena's head on Daniel's shoulder, they watched coverage of the event on their phones. The story had gone viral, particularly the video of Daniel's speech. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some cynical, many from people sharing their own stories of transformation. You know this makes you a target, right? Elena said. People who profit from exploitation don't like examples of people changing. Let them try. I've got you. I've got a community of people who actually care about more than profit. I'll be fine. Such confidence, it's almost attractive. Almost? She kissed him. Completely, utterly, overwhelmingly. Happy? Deliriously. They fell asleep tangled together, the sound of New York traffic below, both of them deeply content in ways money had never provided. The work continued, would always continue, because systemic change wasn't a destination but a direction, a daily choice to see people others made invisible, to value lives systems designed to exploit, to build a world where everyone had real chances rather than empty promises. Daniel Hawthorne had been a blind billionaire who insulted a maid in a hotel, but Elena Vasquez had seen potential where others saw a lost cause, and together, they were proving that even the most privileged could learn to see, even the most broken systems could be changed, even the coldest hearts could thaw. Sometimes transformation begins with a single moment, a casual cruelty exposed, a mask stripped away, a chance meeting that forces you to see yourself clearly for the first time. For Daniel, that moment happened when a woman he'd dismissed as beneath his notice spoke fluently, brilliantly, and forced him to confront who he'd become. The rest was choice, the daily difficult, beautiful choice to keep seeing, keep growing, keep becoming someone worth being. 5 years after insulting a maid in a hotel, Daniel Hawthorne stood at the center of a movement proving business could serve people rather than just profits, that wealth could lift others rather than just concentrate power, that even the blindest among us could learn to see, all because one woman refused to stay invisible, all because one man chose to look,